What was your most embarrassing moment in front of a doctor? I was embarrassed for the doctor. Many years ago I had a suction lipectomy done on my neck to remove excess fat. When I went back for a post-surgical follow-up, the doctor asked me to remove my blouse and bra. Never having been shy or modest around medical professionals, I figured he must have needed to see my neck in relation to the rest of my chest. So I happily disrobed and was standing there with my stuff hanging out. When he realized I was not another patient who had had a boob job, he calmly asked me to put my clothes back on and apologized for mistaking me for the other patient. But he was blushing like crazy. I just got a chuckle out of it. Having a cut on my bollocks after deciding to make them a bit fancy for a checkup. Didn't want to go out but took off a few of the crazy long ones with a razor. Accidental nick. Bled like a mofo but forgot all about it by time the appointment came around. Then she asked me about the scab on my sack. I suddenly flushed and found myself looking down at this unfathomably hot doctor holding my plums in her gloved hand. Before I knew what was happening I was reeling off a story about catching it on a fishhook whilst organizing my tackle in the nude. It sounded ridiculous. She knew it. I knew it. I cringe every time I think of it. First time having a whole body scan. The nurse told me to go to a small room and undress. I did. And as soon as she looks at me she's all like, what the heck? Apparently you are not meant to take all your clothes off. Sounds like her mistake. I was just getting my flu shot and the nurse asked which arm I wanted it in. I was wearing a sweater and I wasn't going to be able to roll it up to my shoulder, so I started taking it off to give the nurse access to my arm. She looked surprised and rushed to close the door. I had a shirt on underneath but apparently she thought I was just stripping my clothes off, so I felt really awkward the rest of the visit. When I was 13, the doctor saw that I had strep throat. You know that little stick they basically shove down your throat to swab it? I hated that test. When she put the stick in my throat, I had a bad reflex and kicked my doctor in the shin. Hard. Most embarrassing thing to ever happen to me in front of her. I had an embarrassing thing happen with the strep test too. At age 11 I found out that I had no gag reflex and my mom joked my future boyfriend would be happy. I didn't understand why for a few years though, or why my doctor laughed. Kind of a different situation, because I wasn't a patient, but I was finishing charting. Stood up and then tried to sit on the rolling chair. I must have slightly pushed it backward because I could only catch the slightest edge of the chair. Tried to catch my balance and sit farther back and the chair slid back farther. This went on for about 15 seconds until I fell on the ground. It was so prolonged and awkward, and of course in front of a group of physicians about to start rounds. It reminds me of that guy who fell for 15 seconds straight, and I love that gif, so thanks for reminding me. Not sure if embarrassing is the right word, but I was definitely ashamed. When I was 14 I confessed to my mum that I thought I had depression. She immediately booked me to go to the doctor later that day. Then my cat came in with a wheat seed in her eye which was fully hooked around her eyeball. We couldn't get it out, so we had to go to the vet, which meant a 30-minute car trip with me holding a cat in agony. Got out of the car with cuts all over my arms, ribcage and sides. Vet mercifully gave us a cage for free on the way back. Helped that I literally bled on his bench. Went to the doctor a few hours later. Mum explained how I'd seemed distant and my grades had tanked that year to the doc, who said yes, and I can see the self-harming. Mum said no, the cat did that today. We had to have her in the car, and I burst into tears because I had been hiding wrist scars from her. When I held out my arm to let the doctor look, I felt so ashamed. Mum's a friggin' angel. I didn't want her to think she'd failed as a mum. I hope you are doing better now. It hurts to know that you were in this situation. Went to the family doctor to get a lump in my armpit checked out. The nurse told me to put on a gown, so I mindlessly stripped down naked and put on a gown. When the doctor came in he had a weird look on his face and said, "You really didn't need to take your pants off." Awkward. Why do they need to embarrass people, jeez? So I had my son 2 years ago. Ended up with really low blood pressure and they gave me a lot of fluid, like a ton, in the excitement after he was born. And without having slept in 24 hours, I forgot what the nice nurse told me when I was transferred to my recovery room, that I should get up and pee frequently. One of the midwives came to visit me to see how I was doing. She was my least favorite one. I needed to pee. I got up and sat down very quickly because I started peeing the second I stood up. She thought I almost fainted and came over telling me that I needed to be more careful as I blushed and said I was peeing. Stood back up, got it all over her shoes even though I was trying to hold it in. Hobbled to the bathroom leaving the largest puddle of urine I've ever seen and still managed to pee in the toilet. And again while another nurse came in to help me back to the bed. Good thing my kid is cute. My epidural worked so well 2 nurses had to help me to the bathroom well after birth. Then call someone in to clean up the little trail of blood from the bed to the bathroom. They missed a spot and I can see it in the pictures of my daughter meeting my son the next day. During a physical I casually asked my regular doctor what a red mark was by my mouth. He was writing something down and without even looking up he said you drool in your sleep. I've always wondered how long he knew that information since he didn't even need to look at me to answer. He was right too. My husband just never wanted to mention it. LOL. When I was 19, also a virgin at that time, I had a pulled muscle in my groin from work. Went to the doctor, and his first assumption, after confirming it wasn't testicular torsion, was a UT. How often do you frick? I don't. Really? Like, none? I'm a virgin. At your age, I was fricking 19 in a town full of people I hate. I'm not here to be judged by you, just fix my pulled muscle. I pooped on a doctor while giving birth. I'd been eating a really seedy bread loaf leading up to labor, so it was really lumpy. They pretended like it didn't happen but I knew. I've heard from an OB nurse friend that it happens a lot, like more than 25% of the time. It was Valentine's Day at school. I was in 3rd grade and you could pay $1 to send someone a rose. Every kid got at least 1 rose, you know. So at the end of the day there are roses everywhere. When I think about it, they might have been different flowers. Our rose is expensive, and we started putting the petals down the backs of people's shirts. Well, later that day I had an appointment with a pediatrician and when she asked me to pull my pants down for the hernia check, a bunch of rose petals fell out of my underoos. I must have fainted because the next thing I remember is my mom and the doctor laughing hysterically and I was laying on the floor. Probably carnations. They're cheap as frick, especially in bulk, and they're hardy enough to last the school day, be abused by kids until you get home and your mum puts them in water without wilting. So last year I had my annual pap smear and I go to a little family clinic. They're all very sweet doctors and they all talk to each other about their patients. Well, I used to have an IUD. I say used to because I had a rare complication from it and after a few months it went through my uterus and took a little off-road trip in my body. Now that was the first time this clinic had seen this complication, so all of the doctors I saw wanted to ask about it and I didn't mind. But back to the pap smear. We were discussing the IUD and my surgery from that situation while I was undressing and she performed the scraping of my insides and while my legs are wide fricking open in the stirrup she goes, wow, I've never seen that before. It's really interesting and scary. I know she was talking about the BC but I still told her, while I was laughing, not to say that as she is in my fanny. When I was 18 I had to get an external ultrasound to see if I had polycystic ovaries. The doctor who did the scan was in his 60s, a very abrupt and to the point doctor. He asked me questions, though never once asked if I had an active private life. Maybe because mum was with me, then said that I would need an internal ultrasound because he couldn't find my left ovary. The doctor that did my internal ultrasound was a bit younger than the first one, and a woman. I remember being shocked at how big the probe thing was. It also wouldn't fit inside and it was painful. I told her that it hurt a lot and she asked me if I had ever been active in my private life. I said no. Her demeanor changed immediately. She backed off quickly, checked her paperwork and said that the other doctor had put down that I was active in my private life. He'd never even asked. I don't know if she was embarrassed. I definitely was. Underneath the gown I was exposed and had my legs up in stirrups. But I think she was shocked that the other doctor would have made that assumption without checking. I suggested that it could have been because mum had been in the room with me at the time. The doctor made an angry noise, then kindly asked why I'd been sent for an internal ultrasound. I said the doctor hadn't been able to find my left ovary. She did an external ultrasound and found my left ovary straight away. When I left, extremely sore, I saw her heading purposefully to the other doctor's office. Oh god. When I moved states to live with now husband, I was just starting a new job. He was out of town a lot for work, not too many friends, tons of stress. One night I was home alone and realized I started bleeding from my backside. Called my now in-laws who live about a mile away and asked them to take me to the I had no clue where the closest one even was. He got there, was admitted, waiting to see the doc, and realized it wasn't blood from back there. I was having my period. I have no clue why I thought the first scenario, but when the doc came in, I had to explain my misunderstanding situation. After, 25 years of menstruation at that point. Complete humiliation I got to live through again and again as the hospital bills came in. Oh poor you. I can totally see myself doing something similar under stress. Every year, the doctor tells me I need to try to put on some weight. During this year's checkup, I broke out the Yoda. Do or do not. There is no try. I totally bombed and doc didn't even crack a smile before breaking into his usual spiel about Mega Mass 4000. I panicked when a doctor asked why our lung specimen has an incision on the third lobe, accidentally stabbed during dissection. Spur of the moment lied about maybe our cadaver died from stab wound in the lung. I said. He replied, as an aspiring doctor, next time own up to your mistake instead of making up stories to cover it up. I'm so embarrassed by my action then, I still cringe when I remember. I hate anatomy class. I have nothing but respect for this doctor, although yes, I would have appreciated if he didn't do it in front of our group, but I know I'm wrong about lying and it's fair to get called out for that. The value of credibility transcends all profession and it was reinforced to me that day. Had cyst on my tailbone that needed to be lanced and gauzed. Already an embarrassing situation for a young woman. Came in a couple days later for follow-up exam and the very attractive young doctor said, nice to see you face to face this time. I think he knew he was being cheeky, pun intended, but I was mortified. Pap smears are always the worst. The absolute worst one was when I was too shy to tell my doctor that, no, your student cannot shadow you when I'm spread eagle. He was explaining my fanny to the student for a good 5 minutes as though it were a diagram. It's even more special when the student asked what's that thing there by the cervix, mucus is normal. Christopher, shut up. I had this happen recently. I didn't really mind because I've had 2 kids and tons of people have seen my goods as a result of it, including my poor father who thought I had already given birth and burst into the room as my son was crowning. It was funny, though, listening to the doctor use my fanny as a teaching instrument. When I was a teenager, I jerked off a lot. I can't remember exactly the problem, but at some point I worried I had damaged something. I think I started getting painful urination and this weird discharge once in a while and I didn't seem as hard. I ended up worrying about it enough to tell my mom, who took me to the doctor. Primary care guy questioned me, then took my dong and brutally squeezed it, I'm guessing to check for discharge. I then got referred to a urologist, who at first harshly questioned me if I was active in my private, and not to lie, I was like 14 and a super awkward, zit-covered nerd. Anyway, no one found anything wrong. I had bad OCD as a child and used to beat off too much to get the right number of wanks in. We're talking 20 plus a day here. Eventually my dong swelled up to the size of a large sausage and I told my mother. She took me to a psychiatrist and he made me a chart we kept in the kitchen to count each time I jerked off. I had to go and fill it in every time I went for a wank. I was having horrible unexplained stomach pains on the cold metal table on my hands and knees. Somehow I didn't expect him to very forcefully jam a slippery lubed finger knuckle deep up my previously unexplored butt without even a warning. I instinctively kicked him hard in the chest while emanating a bizarre guttural growl scream mother in front of 2 female nurses and my overly Christian mother. One nurse burst out laughing and left the room. Being face down, I can only cringe and imagine the other responses. TL, DR, doc fingered my butt in front of my mom. I have just died laughing. I'm so sorry for you. But heck, that's the most natural response ever. I was around 12-13. This older man around 50 was checking my balls, doing the whole turn and cough thing. Anyway, in an attempt to make the situation less awkward, I said, "This must be your favorite part of your job." He then told me, "Just wait till you are 40 and I have to check your prostate." I started laughing. Then I realized I was laughing while this old guy was cupping my balls. It got kinda weird. When I was 18, I went to the doctor because I was having testicular pain and was concerned. My regular doctor was out on vacation at the time, so they scheduled me with a different doctor. The day of the appointment, I found out it was a girl. She was a very attractive, probably almost 30. She asked me to pull down my pants and I hesitated because I felt awkward. She told me if I didn't feel comfortable she could get a male doctor. I said it was okay, so I proceeded while she feels to see if I have any lumps or anything on my balls. I get the biggest boner of all time. I was embarrassed and she said it was okay, it happens. I also noticed her wedding ring and couldn't help but wonder how she would tell her husband when getting home from work. Had to give a pee test for a new job. I was nervous, not because I was on drugs or anything, but because I never had to before. So I show up and fill out forms and then the nurse tells me to pee in the cup and not to flush or wash my hands in the tiny bathroom. I got nervous once inside and I had to poop and couldn't just pee and not poop, you know? So after like 5 minutes I opened the door and tell her what my issue was. She was taken aback and was like, "That's fine, just do your thing." So I went and then peed in the cup. I came out and handed it to her and I was like, "Do you want me to flush?" She was just like, yes please." Freaking awkward. 0/10 wouldn't do it again. This happened when I was around 9 years old. I had hurt my neck, had a big bump on the side and couldn't hold my head up straight. I was in a lot of pain. So I go see the doctor and he asks me how I hurt my neck. So I explained that in gym class we were doing headstands and I was practicing on my bed at home. I fell over sideways, and hence the neck injury. Well, the doctor started laughing. Then, he left the room, gathered up the other doctors in the practice and made me tell them how I hurt my neck. Then they all started laughing. This was pretty traumatic for me as a small child. To this day I have no clue what is funny about a child falling over and hurting his neck. Maybe I could see why it might be funny to other children, but to doctors, I don't get it. That's cruel. Congrats doc, you gave a little kid shame. I went to the ER for constant vomiting and stomach aches. The doctor asked me when was my last period. I told her that I was born with male genitals. She was embarrassed. I'm also. There was a lump near my genitals. 15-year-old me was very concerned and had to go through the awkwardness of telling my mother I had a lump near my genitals and needed to see my pediatrician immediately. Pull down pants for doctor who sees my impeccably fresh shaven genitalia, sees a lump, and immediately starts to laugh. I had used a cheap razor to get my nads to shimmer and glisten so spectacularly, which had caused an ingrown hair and cyst to form. He took a pen and drew the whole thing out for me on the paper atop the table. Wet warm cloth for a few days to bring it to a head and months of my mother awkwardly asking if I was sure everything was still okay down there. Wibbly wobbly testically westically. When the young female doctor wanted to check my cervix and blushed when she said she needed to look down there, I was so embarrassed for her. Don't they learn the proper names for it in medical school? My then boyfriend has a giant dong, and he tore my fanny. I went to the hospital and they asked me if we were using any toys or scissors. Haha, it was incredibly embarrassing. But luckily I didn't need stitches. The elderly nurse recommended a ton of different lubes to me, which was pretty funny. I ended up in the ER for a severe stomach flu, came down with it in full swing at my pain management doctor. Couldn't leave the bathroom BC, I was throwing up so hard I couldn't stop pee, let alone get the 50 featuring to my car. After the EMS brought the stretcher to the bathroom door and took me the 3 miles to the hospital. Before I could get the Ivzofran for my nausea, I kept throwing up violently and simultaneously pee myself. They had to change my sheets twice. It was so embarrassing. To a nurse, not a doctor, that moment when I had to explain exactly how I knew there was a cyst on my cervix. I used euphemisms for a while, and she kept getting more and more confused. until I finally said I was masturbating and stuck my fingers up there. Okay, she seemed shocked at the concept. Went to the ER to have surgery on my leg. Prep nurse told me she was gonna have to insert a catheter so I could pee during surgery. I had to ask my mom to leave the room so this other woman could shove a tube down my pee hole. Freaking awful. Went in for a regular checkup. I have anxiety, so I was getting really nervous just waiting around for the doctor come in the room. Everything goes smoothly and she asks to take my blood pressure, so I remove my coat and cardigan. At that moment I see that my blouse had massive underboob sweat marks that went down to the waistband of my jeans. Another win for the underboob sweat. I once thought I snapped my banjo string and I ended up having this strange foreign doctor touching my dong while he made small talk. The time I asked Dre for an autograph after a concert and he turned out to be Exhibit. I didn't feel like a xenophobic butthole at all. I had just come back from camp and was brushing my hair, and I felt this weird little lump on the top of my head. So I showed my mom, and we had no clue what it was. Her thought was maybe it was a tick. She kept off trying to squeeze it and it hurt really bad. Off to the doctor we go, me slightly freaking out about Lyme disease. Nurse comes in, looks at watery-eyed CNK93, takes one look at lump, prods it with a finger and states that's a birthmark. Gynecologist every time. I have the word respect tattoo down there, right above a tiny crab tattoo. C is a Helluva drug. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.